Hello and welcome to today's video. Now today I've got a bike very dear to my heart. This is my 1962 T100 SS Desert Racer. I'm going to show you around it and tell you a little bit about it. So let's start off with what is this bike. This is a 1962 Triumph. It's a parallel twin 500cc. Now these came in various models, but this one is the SS, and what that means is it's had a little bit of tuning, it's got high compression pistons, high lift, long duration cams, and it's also got a bigger front wheel. Now originally it wouldn't have looked like this at all. It probably would have looked something a little bit like this. But when I got the bike, it wasn't original paint, and what I really wanted was a scrambler or a desert racer. So as I started looking at desert racers, they began to appeal to me more and more and more. The modifications they made were really functional and really appealing to me, and I knew it was something that I could do. So if you're not familiar with desert racing, it's something that was very popular in America during sort of the late 60s and 70s. And sometimes it was as simple as lighting a smoke bomb in the middle of the desert and racing to it. There were more complex variations, but that was the basis of it, and anyone could go and race if they modified their motorcycle appropriately. And that again appealed to me because I'm just any old bloke and I like to revel in the idea of being able to race, even though I can't. So racing through the desert, you're going to come up against a lot of sand, you're going to come up against rocks, ravines, thorns and bushes, lots of things that could do damage to your motorcycle. So some of the modifications that I've made to this are to help cope with that if I were to ever do it. Now I'm not a desert racer, in fact we don't even have any deserts in England. I've raced this at the Malay Mile and I was very much surprised and really enjoyed it. I actually did okay. I do also occasionally take this green laning, that's where I am right now, and I have to say it performs really quite well. So when I bought the motorcycle, it had been laid up since 1983 I believe. It had a bent valve and a few other things that needed replacing, but on the whole I got a very good deal. Now my good friend Rick Parkington helped me rebuild the motor and also helped me with the build as well. I had owned a BSA before, a British motorcycle, but I wasn't familiar with working on them, and this has really helped familiarise myself with them and actually grow my love for them, because this is without a doubt my favourite motorcycle. So there is sort of a common misconception that older bikes are slow, but speed is relative, and if you're doing 30 miles an hour on a skateboard, that's really fast. This isn't a skateboard, but it is probably capable of doing around about 80 miles an hour, and it is quite a torquey motor. So it is very impressive really, coupled with a large rear sprocket. It's very good off-road. So let's start at the front of the motorcycle, and I'm going to work from the front to the back and tell you about the bits I've done and why. So starting here, I've got standard T100 SS front wheel. The SS came with a 19-inch wheel, whereas the other T100 models came with an 18-inch. 19 is great because it's a little bit easier to kind of roll over the bumps. Not as big as a 21, but honestly I find that 21-inch tyres are a little bit too skinny for the kind of thing I would want to do on this. So 19 was perfect, I was really fortunate to get that. I've got some Heidenau K67s. They're really quite good for on-road and off-road because this is road legal. I ride it quite a lot when I can. So the mudguard, this is something that's typical of a 60s, 70s desert racer. You either had no mudguard or you might have had one of these. So this is stainless steel, it's about 3mm thick. That's something I made myself, and I've also made all the mountings myself. This doubles up as a sort of fork brace. That's something else you'll see a lot in desert racers. Hitting a bump, you don't want your forks to twist, so that keeps that nice and rigid. So something that's really important to me is keeping a period aesthetic, making it look like it could have been from the 60s or could have been from the 70s. And so for that reason I have aged and weathered everything, but also I have used brass rivets to attach that. It's nicer because you won't have a bolt sticking out underneath here, and it's just a quirky little touch. I've also drilled out the brace as well. Most of the stuff on here I can drill out, I will. Without sacrificing any strength, I can shed a bit of weight, but more because that is something that you would have seen in period race machines. So moving up here, I've got this little race plate. Now this again is made out of 3mm stainless steel. I made that myself. You can see on there I've got my race number. That is from the Malay Mile, where I raced this last year, and I've kept it on there as a little sort of memento next year when I go again, I'll pop another sticker on top of that, but there's going to be a different video all about the Malay Mile and preparing the bike for that. So the handlebars, believe it or not, actually came off of a Suzuki VL125. That was my first bike. I swapped out the bars and I had these laying around, and when I put them on, they look just perfect. So I've gone with those and they ride really well. They feel really, really great. So up here I've got a 1/4 turn throttle, and that is something that actually came on the bike, but that's really great because I would have put one of those on there anyway. And what that means is that I have to do less turning of the throttle to get a little bit more response out of it. So it's great for if you need a bit of grunt to get over a rock, or if you want to power it out of a corner. So moving down here, I've got my bash guard. Now this is something I actually bought as a blank. It required a lot of modification and a lot of shaping to actually get it to fit and work. And again, I've drilled that out just to give it that race aesthetic and shed a little bit of weight. Now this is really handy because when you're racing through the desert, there are rocks around every corner. You don't know what you're going to hit. And if you hit it without one of these, it might well damage your frame, or even worse, it will damage your engine, and we don't want that. So that's really handy, and it's also a good peace of mind for me when I do a bit of green laning. So the motor is standard. As I say, the T100 SS came with a couple of little extras that made it a little bit faster, and you can certainly feel that it is quite a fast bike and very much responsive. The only thing I have done is on the carburetor, I've got a bell mouth intake, and I've also got a float bowl extension. Now the float bowl extension basically means that the float bowl will fill up with more fuel, and in theory you get better response and a better rev range. I don't know how true that is, but it's nice to have on there anyway. The bell mouth is something I'm going to change at some point, because obviously racing through the desert, there's going to be a lot of sand around, and the bell mouth is actually the last thing you want going through the desert. But that's something I'm going to sort at a later date. Basically, this bike, I'm happy to ride around as it is, and I'm really, really proud of it. I really, really love it. But there are some modifications that I want to do just to take it a little bit further. So moving on to the tank, this is the standard tank now. If you've seen the photo when I originally got the bike, it didn't look like this. It wasn't original paint, so I had no problem in stripping it off. But also the tank had rusted through, so it needed repairing. This paintwork I basically came up with myself and aged it to look like it could have been pulled from somewhere in America. And was original to the race bike. But this is something I spent a lot of time working out how to do, and I finally got it to the stage where I think I can create a realistic patina. I don't like false patinas, I like stuff to look real. And the beauty of this is that whilst this looks like it's rusty, it's actually not. That's something I've done to the paintwork to get that effect. Now, if you're a Triumph guy, you might notice something a little bit different going on here, and that is that I don't have my luggage rack. What I've actually got are these 2 aluminium straps that I've made, and that basically allows me to run 2 throttle cables. Now one of those is in use, the other one is a spare, and that again is something from the desert races. If you're going through the bush and you snapped a cable, instead of your race being over, you could just swap it to the other one, and it'd be really easy to do because it's up here. You don't have to take the tank off or anything like that. And what's more is that that cable actually routes itself beautifully, maybe even better than the way it was supposed to be routed from the factory. So usually what you'd see on a desert racer would be a Bates desert seat, and they're usually quite thick and a little bit bulky looking, much like this one, but I can't afford the money that an original Bates seat is going for. I did, however, have this seat laying around, which is actually off of a CZ250 Sport, and without any modification it fitted really well and it actually looks the part. So to some people this might look a little bit bulky, but really this is in keeping with the kind of seat they would have had, so it's important to me to have that, and it's also really comfortable. The side panel and the oil tank are standard, they're original to the bike, and there's something I painted up. I painted these little Tiger 100 SS motives on there. I do a lot of art, and so it seemed like a sensible move to put something a little bit quirky on there. I've also added little touches of checkerboard throughout the bike as well, because again that's sort of tied in with the whole race history thing. So at the moment I've got the standard sprocket on there, and when I go to Malay Mile and do things like that, I actually put a larger sprocket on there. This is a bolt over sprocket, and again this is something typical of racing history and desert racing, and basically what that means is it's a sprocket I can bolt over the top of the standard sprocket and put in an extra length of chain, and that allows me to have lower gearing. It's actually 52 tooth, so it's massive, and it's really good for getting a good start and powering out of the corners. but it's not very good for being on the road. It's a little bit furious, and you will top out at about 40 miles an hour. Now, I have jumped this, and it flies a lot better than my Kawasaki, but also the shocks handle themselves surprisingly well. The problem I do have is with the foot pegs, so that's something I'll be modifying at some point. They basically sit on a taper, and on landing they can occasionally slide forwards, which obviously we don't want. So yeah, there's lots more to come on this bike, and I will be getting around to that when I've got things sorted with a workspace and got the chopper done as well. So that's it for our little walk around, our little tour. There's a huge amount of more detail that I could go into, but honestly we'd be here hours and you guys would probably get really bored. But now you guys know the kind of bike that I might be riding on future events when we can go ahead with doing those. So I suppose the next thing is I need to start it up, and you guys need to hear it because it sounds absolutely beautiful and it makes all the sounds that a Triumph Twin should. So that's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the little tour around my Triumph. This is kind of a taste of the video tours and the bikes that you might be seeing in the future. So if you liked the Triumph, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, and if you want to see more, make sure you subscribe. A massive thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Well, hey, steady on.